Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for my 1/6 scale US M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. This here is a video and probably a project that some people out there, mistakenly I might add, probably thought I totally forgot about and just left in limbo, and that is absolutely not the case. When it comes to these builds, I always get them done. I never just leave things in limbo. It's not the way I roll. So if that's what you were thinking, shame on you, because you should know me better than that. Anyway, this here was a video that was one that was in the making for a little bit longer than I anticipated, partially due to the fact that winter came and it's kind of hard to do some of the work that I need to do on some of the parts in the winter months, but also I was actually spending the majority of my time and resources working on the T-34, making sure that project gets finished. And with that project coming to the end, well, that opens things up for me to work on the other projects that I have in the shop. This jumbo here included. So since the last video update, the road wheels and the rear idler wheels are completed. They've been assembled, painted, weathered, and at this point they're actually ready for installation. I'm not going to be installing them at this point in the video. I'll be going over why at the end, so stay tuned for that. However, the running gear wise, with the exception of the sprockets, this build here, it's all done and it's ready to go. So needless to say, there's going to be a ton of info coming right at you. Let's go ahead and kick this one off. Before we go over anything new, however, I do want to take a moment to take a step back and reference some of the items that were referenced in the previous video. Of course, in the previous video, I go over in great lengths the ECA VVS suspension sets and how I mentioned that many of the old cast resin and stamped sheet metal items that were originally designed for use on those sets were retired and phased out with new generation 3D printed parts. And the skid rails here were definitely one of them. Now, the skid rails in the other video were also made out of 3D print. However, like I mentioned in that video, the sets that are found on that particular example were close to the scale that were needed. However, after assembling them, I saw that there was some room for some slight improvement, and what we have here are the same units but with those improvements made. These ones here are not for use on my build. My build is perfectly fine the way it is. However, these sets here are actually outgoing in an order, so these are hot off the press and are production units. Geometrically speaking and feature speaking, they are identical. I did not mess with the CAD file whatsoever in that regard. The only thing I did was I slightly adjusted the scale of the parts to make them more appropriately scaled for the ECA sets. Outside of that, what you see here is what you get. They still secure to the piece via the fasteners, and if you notice there are 4 fasteners that are required to anchor this thing in place. And if you want to know more about that, again, I recommend watching the previous video. However, these ones here are going to be bagged and shipped to the customer. Also along the lines of parts getting bagged and getting ready to be shipped to the customer are the return rollers. So in the previous video, I mentioned that the return roller was a all cast resin piece for the longest period of time that was included with the sets. However, just like I mentioned in that video, that mold has completely been worn out and is incapable of producing a quality part. Also, as I mentioned in the other video, the ones that are found on my model are the old cast resin ones that I was able to clean up for use on my own personal build. However, for actual customer use, absolutely not, and they were definitely not going to be something that I was willing to have go out to a customer. So after that video was done, I went ahead, hit CAD, and I came up with the parts that we have here. So here we have a first look of the new ECA 3D printed VVSS return rollers. These items here are going to be supplied with the ECA VVSS sets. However, if for one reason or other anyone's interested in just the return rollers, they too are going to be listed on the ECA catalog and sold separately. As for the detailing, well, let's go ahead and take a closer look. So first, the wheel is comprised of 2 pieces, and they get plugged together via 2 pins like I referenced with the road wheels, as well as the other wheels are going to be mentioned in this video. The orientation on these aren't as important as, say, the main roll wheels were, so you just stick 2 pins in and they just glue together like that. Once they are glued together, there is a center seam to contend with. However, this is something that's easily polished away with a little bit of super glue and or putty. Unlike the other sections, there are no other details found on the face over here, so you can polish the thing down and not worry about any sort of loss or collateral damage in terms of detailing. The pieces are fully detailed with the same exact detailing that were found on the other parts. So we have here the center lock washer right there on the midsection. It does have the wrench slits present. It also has these sunk in areas right over here on either side. Again, an iconic bit of detailing found on Sherman VVSS rollers. And we also have the sunk in Zerk fitty wells right here and here. The fittings are also included. They are a separate part, as they are also for the road wheels, and yes, I have a set of those. I'm going to be getting those in a second. But as you can see, you have everything you need to go ahead and get the wheel fully detailed out. The center hole is 1/4 inch, the exact same size on the ECA sets. Again, they're obviously meant to be a direct replacement for the old school ECA cast resin ones. This scale is also identical. Again, I just basically was working with my framework. So here go the wheels, as you can see, but like I mentioned before, there are Zerk fittings, and finally I was able to get the Zerk fittings in hand, and here you can see a small little runner of the Zerk fittings. The pieces here are thoroughly detailed with the appropriate detailing for the fitting itself. These are made to be installed separately, and in case anyone's wondering, well, John, why don't you go ahead and integrally print them on? Well, first, with the detailing of these pieces over here, it's better if it's left separately printed, but also, these pieces are always red in coloring, or at least they should be, and on your builds, don't forget to paint them red. And it's easier to go ahead and paint them off the model and then install them at the tail end, as opposed to go ahead and try to paint them when fitted in place. So with this in mind, you could go ahead and build the model and continue with the course of construction, paint these guys off the model, and when it comes time for installation, you simply snip them off, while painted and weathered, of course, drop them into their appropriate location, and you're good to go. Same exact runner, by the way, is also going to be required for the road wheels, which, yes, they are included with the road wheels, and these sections here are also going to be included with another wheel that I'm going to be mentioning in a moment. This is also another set of parts that I wasn't planning on offering separately, but I don't see the harm in why not doing it. So yes, these two are also offered on the catalog individually, in case you have, say, the Dragon 1/6 scale M4 Sherman, or even the 21st Century M5 Stuart, and you want to add the missing Zerk fittings. There you go. You can go ahead and apply these to basically any American tank out there in 1/6 scale, from the Dragon M4A3, which it does actually have, I believe, the wells in place for the Zerk fittings, so you could add it to that one. You could also add it to the Armortech Shermans, either the VVSS M4A3 Firefly, M3 Lee, or the last release version of their M4A3E8. And not to mention their M26 Pershing as well. So needless to say, there's a lot of American tanks out there that could use some Zerk fittings. Again, these are listed on the ECA catalogs. Picking up where we last left off in the previous video is back to the road wheels. In the other video, I mentioned that these are the new ECA VVSS road wheels that are now listed on the catalog. Unlike the old ones, which were all made out of a single piece of cast resin, these ones here are 3D print and are a multi-component part. I.e., we have the rim, we have a cast rubber tire, and we also have little Zerk fittings that get added to the appropriate locations. The pieces are printed in FDM, and the tire is made out of a resin print that was then used as a master. A mold was made, and the rubber tire sections were casted. Those I have all done off camera, and we'll see how that goes as the video goes on. However, one thing that I also mentioned in the previous video was I made a mistake with my math, where how many road wheels I actually needed, and I had only enough to equip one side of the tank. So here we have the other sets now finally in hand, and I'm finally able to get an entire Sherman over here sprung up on its wheels. Although you're probably saying, John, you still screwed up with your math because you are too short. That's because I have those pieces right here offhand, and the reason why is because I'm going to show how they get assembled in a moment. To assemble the road wheels, we have here all the parts on the table, sans the rubber tire and the Zerk fittings. But to assemble the rim itself, it's done in the same way. And by the way, there are two options of wheels on the catalog. This one here is the version with the rivets on it, and the assembly, however, is exactly the same between the two, so there's no point getting that on camera. In order to assemble the wheels, you're going to need some super glue, as well as also a nail. Now, these nails are supplied with the set, so this is something you don't have to worry about. To assemble the part, I was messing around with it off camera, and they assemble pretty quickly. So the idea is you want to cut the small little lengths of steel to length, glue them into the appropriate location, and the purpose is that these two sections are going to index appropriately, and because of that, they will line up the way they should. With the way the holes are lined up, they could only be fitted on in one way. Also, you'll look on the back portion of the wheels, we have a little A printed into the back, while there's nothing printed on this one. The A's will all go to the ones that do not have any sort of printing. This again is to ensure that the pieces appropriately line up. You have to pay attention here because you can easily glue the two pieces together. However, there is a safety thing where the pins will not line up, and if you're trying to assemble and the pins aren't lining up, pop the thing open and check to see if your mounting two A's together or two B's. Same thing is true for the ones on the opposite side. So the first thing I'm going to do for the actual assembly is I'm going to take a little drop of glue and I'm going to add to each of these three little holes. And on the nail itself, I found it's best to go ahead and cut off the one section, the portion where when a hammer is actually supposed to hit it, and also cut off the pointy area. And from there, I'm just going to drop it into the hole. Once the piece is fitted into the hole, I'm going to snip away the majority of it. However, I want to leave about 1/4 of an inch remaining. You don't need a whole lot, just a little bit to do it. So something like that should be more than suffice. With the way the nail is with its original length, I was able to get all three of the areas flushed out with one single nail. It doesn't have to be exact. You don't have to go in here with a caliper or anything along those lines, making sure everything is just the right size and it's all symmetrical. You can just eyeball it. So as you can see, right there, that should be more than enough. You could test fit if so deemed fit. Now again, like the way I stated before, the holes will only line up in a certain way. And after doing these a few times, I can see the shape here of the triangle. So let's go ahead and drop this guy in place. And as you can see, I got the correct key. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and add the glue. So I'm just going to add 3 little drops of glue on the inside here of these holes. Just like so. And the rest I'm just going to add around the back portion of the piece itself. Now you don't want to be super liberal with the amount of glue used, but you don't want to be stingy with it either. Just got to basically use your head. So just a nice little glue bead like this. Maybe a nice little star pattern in the center is really all you need. And that's basically all it's going to be required to get the things glued in place. So again, you want to make sure the holes are lining up just right. And drop this guy in place and just press them together. If any glue oozes out from the side here, just rub it into the line or into the seam over here. And then you just want to just eyeball it, make sure that the hole's lining up appropriately and that the sides are not shifting or vortexing or anything. You do have some room for latitude, but just basically the straighter the better. And you just want to hold it for a second or two until the glue gets a good bite. Once that happens, the wheel is good to go. You can set it aside and repeat the same step for the next one. From the row wheels takes us to the rear idler wheels, and here you get to see the components on the table. Here we have a brand new set from EastCoastArmory.com, which are the new ECA VVSS 3D printed rear idler set. And this is something that, again, replaces and phases out an older tooling item that's been on the catalog now for many years. Currently on the ECA catalog, I have a solid cast resin version of the exact same rear idler wheel, and this is something that's been in production now since about, I don't know, 2011 or so. And, well, fast forward a little over 10 years later, that set now, it's time to be put out to pasture. However, that set's still going to be offered on the ECA catalog for a little while until the molds eventually start wearing out, to which then the piece is going to be officially retired, and at that point there, it's going to be put out to pasture, and there will only be the 3D printed one. The reason why I say this is because the resin cast one offers a lower cost alternative compared to the 3D print one, which is going to be a bit more costly in comparison to the old school one. But regardless, if you are looking to save some pennies and replace your idler wheel, the other one is still a viable option, and again, it's still on the ECA catalog. However, this one here is the next generation, and it definitely blows the old one away in basically every way. As for the wheels themselves, these wheels here are using the real M4A3s that I had access to in order to get the details on. And every single detail aspect, or just about every single detail aspect on those real wheels were used to get the CAD files that I was able to make these components out of. And where these wheels differ, and where honestly they are the best compared to all the other variants on the market, is with the rim. So first, as for the wheel, it's a two-half assembly. We have a front piece and a rear piece, just like the row wheels, and they plug together using some metal pegs, which I'll show in a moment. There will be a center seam to contend with on this pattern here, but as for the wheel, let's go ahead and start with the front portion. So the real wheel is a multi-piece assembly, and it's all comprised out of steel stampings. And one thing that's interesting is that on the wheel itself, you have the tube section, which is literally just a stamped sheet metal tube, and then you have the face sections, which are stamped, and then they are just welded in place. In addition to that, specifically on the one on the outer portion, it's then topped off with a ring that they go ahead and weld. We'll circle back to that. So back to the stampings themselves. Here you can see on the ECA piece the component now in the flesh. So it has the appropriate geometry of the stampings. This includes the geometry here of the spokes. And also you can notice the convex shape of the dome itself. We have the center portion here for the hubcap, which will plug in, and I'll get to that in a moment. And we also have on the stampings the wells here for the Zerk fittings. And yes, the Zerk fittings are also included, not seen on the table, but they are the same ones that were mentioned before. And to the casual observer, this looks like just any other garden variety VVSS rear idler wheel. And that's where things start to get different. If we look on this section over here, you will see a recess. And on basically every single Sherman model on the market, every single one of them basically has this mistake where they just have the piece here just be a solid chunk of piece of material, and it just has nice face detailing. And this is done by basically every single, or just about every single tank kit on the market. TACOM is one that comes to mind where they actually did it correctly by having this little ring here be a separate photo etch component, which is really cool. That's something I go over in the other video. Back to this one over here. The piece does have the proper inset that you see right here. In addition to the inset, you will also hopefully be able to see the weld bead that runs along this section over here. It's very faint, as it is on the real one, but there is a weld bead present in this location. If we go ahead and look at the reverse side of the wheel, this too, again, is slightly different compared to the one on the front, where we no longer have those wells for the Zerk fittings. Those are only found on the front portion of the wheel. And the inner section here is slightly different. The reason why I have this inset, well, first it's found on the real vehicle, and also this allows you to install a washer. So when you're mounting it onto the vehicle, it has a little bit of space, and it actually allows the thing to properly sit and actually spin freely. As for why this is important, well, this actually, that little offset actually does help when you mount on the tracks, and just leads for a better engineered vehicle. So that's why I have that inset over here. And by the way, the old cast rest ones had the exact same features, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But what's different on this one is, again, we have the stamping here with the lip, but you notice on this side there's no weld bead, and that's by design. With the way the thing was stamped, the tube was just stamped at the factory with this section here integrally stamped on, and then the inner face and the outer face were literally slipped on, spot welded in place, and then the outer ring here was placed and then welded, sealing the whole thing off. And on this one here, hopefully you could see this on camera, but you could see that little ridge right there. There's a little gap between this ring and the rim that we have right here. And this is, again, as per the real one. Like I stated before, if you look at a real Sherman wheel, you will see a little space where the bottom portion of the rim, this stamp section, is actually welded or makes contact with the outer drum side of the idler. And this detailing here is found on the ECA piece. This is definitely not something you'll see on any other Sherman on the market. So that's something to consider. The pieces are integrally printed hollow, with the spindle drilled out, and this is for 1/4 inch, the same as the diameter of shafts that I use on my idler mounts, so it's intended for a direct install. You can obviously drill them out if you desire, but they come stock with the 1/4 inch hole. For installing the parts, or I should say assembling them, again, for these two units over here with the split design, we have here a front and a rear mounted wheel, and they can only be installed one way. It's not like you could accidentally install two forwards together and two rears together, so it does make the assembly easier in that respect. And if we see here with the way the pinholes line up, again, it's unique to these wheels, and they will only go together one way. I'll go ahead and assemble them in a moment. The next thing to reference are the hubcaps. And this, again, is another bit of equipment that retires an older set that was on the ECA catalog since about 2008 or so. So that's an old set, and it's time for that one also to be put out to pasture. This set here, 3D printed, and it's, again, superior in every way. First, with the geometry. The piece kind of has like that Brody World War I helmet type shape. Is that the World War I helmet for the British and Americans? I think it is. Yeah, anyway, it has that type of geometry to it where it's not just a sphere sitting flat onto the disc. It actually has a little curvature to it because, just like with those helmets, these things are stamped. Not out of the same gauge sheet metal, of course, much thicker, but still, it's a stamping nonetheless. And that stamping geometry is found on the 3D print. On top of that, the fasteners are integrally printed on. And these are just intended to just drop directly in place onto the ECA new idler. If you notice, there is a little key and groove type system. This is so the piece just drops in appropriately in the exact same orientation, first time, every time. The fasteners only secure on a certain way. So if you have the piece like this, you're actually making a mistake. And that's why I went ahead and did this key and groove type format. So it basically simplifies the assembly where, no matter what, you can't screw it up. So that's how that's done. In addition to the inner section, we also have some stamp numbers or ID markings right here on the printing itself. It's going to be tricky to get on camera, but rest assured they are there. Obviously, this is something that's going to come out in better light once the thing is painted and weathered. Once a little paneling accent goes in there, we'll definitely do the trick. This is found on both units, and the numbers themselves are again lifted off of the real units that I was using for reference. So here's the wheel going through its assembly. Just like with the other ones, I just took a nail and I cut it into 4 little pegs. They don't have to be too long. They don't really have to be the same size. As long as they don't inhibit the other piece from mounting in place, that's really all the length you need. I also went ahead and added glue into the appropriate location. Note around the axle hole, I don't exactly put too much over there, or I just circle it so that once it compresses together, it doesn't ooze too much into the hole itself. Will it? Probably, but it's a good way to mitigate it. I'm going to go ahead and add some drops of glue on the inner recesses here, again, just for more strength. Now I'm just going to line up the holes. And once you find the sweet spot, just press the pieces together, and the wheel is now assembled. Actually, after gluing the other one together, I noticed that one of the pegs was slightly too long, and it was causing the piece not to sit flush. So I quickly popped it open, snipped away the extra material, and voila, now the wheel is reassembled and is much better in comparison. So from here, I'm just going to let the glue set and dry. After that, I'll go ahead and do the seam removal found on the center portions. And to further assist to make sure that the wheel is as tight and glued as possible, obviously I did a calling all cars approach with the clamps. Fortunately, I had enough to do this wheel over here, and as for the other wheel, that would be taken care of with this setup that I have right here. Luckily, the jaws in the vise are big enough to hold the wheel in place, but just to protect the wheel from any sort of marring, just some scrap pieces of cardboard are used to make for a nice little barrier. Nothing left to do now, but just let the stuff dry. And this takes us to the rear idlers with the jigs removed. At this point here, you can see they're going through their bodywork so that I could blend away that seam, making them look absolutely seamless. Off camera, I went ahead and just sanded the units down via the palm sander with some 220 grit sandpaper, as you can see right here. The trick when you're sanding these down is you want to avoid hitting this side here on the front portion, because as I mentioned before, there's that small little weld bead in this area over here. It'll be really counterproductive to go ahead and polish that down. So fortunately, sanding it down is pretty easy. What you do is just line it up like this here, where the palm sander actually just doesn't move in the location where it's going to hit the weld beads. So you just basically line it up like that, and you just run it across these surfaces over here until the seam work was blended away. The red putty is just going to be done by hand, and this will be addressed once the putty is fully set and dry, which is something I'm going to take care of in the morning. Moving on a little bit further, here we have the 2 idler wheels with the bodywork complete, or at least hopefully complete. I'm going to find out after the coat of primer gets fitted in place, but at this time here, you get to see the sanding that was done. sanding was done all by hand, and this was all done with both dry and wet sanding. And I just was doing the trick where I look at the piece in the light to make sure that there's no lumps or any other type of crevices that need to be taken care of. So far, everything appears to be so far so good. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and get the things primed. But before I do, the one thing I do want to mention is that the seam removal work was done with the use of both red putty, as well as also a thick smear of super glue after the first coat of red putty was sanded. That was polished away. I then hit it again with a small little smear of thick super glue to take care of any sort of superficial pits or any other type of imperfections that remain. And then that too was both dry and wet sanded to the condition that we have here. And jumping back to the row wheels, here we have the row wheels, or at least some of them. The other ones are off camera on another shelf drawing. And they are at the next step where the wheels themselves have been primed, painted, and weathered, and they're actually just waiting for the last of the weathering to dry so that I could mount on the rubber tires, which have also went through their weathering as well. Just like on the smaller vehicles, when it comes to these 1/6 scale tanks, it's best to paint and weather the wheels off the model because obviously once fitted in place, it's a bit more problematic to try to get them thoroughly painted with all the appendages and other things in the way. So for the wheels themselves, they were painted with the same color base coat that I painted on the hull that was mentioned in a couple videos ago. And these guys here have gone through their weathering work. The weathering is my typical format. I got a little bit of a lightning wash on there with a little bit of diluted cream. I also have a darker shade of olive drab for some counter shading, and the other weathering that we see at this time is just some, to me, a black Panaline accent, which, as you can see, it's drying up. And once it's dry, it will actually look really, really good and grimy, which is exactly what you want for a road wheel like this. The Panaline accent does a great job going into all those nooks and crannies. Like over here where the stampings are, is also on those fasteners themselves. And also with the wells over here for the Zerk fittings, they would undoubtedly be sweaty. So there are going to be a few more effects that are going to be added to these areas in the next step. For the rubber tires, they have just been weathered with a little dusting of some flat white via the airbrush. That's really all that's added to them. These things will just slip on when the time comes, and the rubber tire installation will be completed. The other thing to mention is that currently off camera, I have the Zerk fittings. They are on their sprue still, and I went ahead and primed them and hit them with some flat red via the airbrush, and then once everything is dry, they'll be mounted in place. Here are the Zerk fittings right here. This is just, to me, a flat red, applied via the airbrush. Of course, the units were first primed with flat black prior to the paintwork getting applied. Jumping forward a little bit further, here you can see the wheels fully completed, assembled, and are actually ready for installation on the model. If we bring the camera in closer, you get to see what the final outcome looks like. And you can see the difference between the two patterns of dish wheels now in their completed format. Also, something that I added that I didn't mention in the previous scene was another bit of weathering. That's one that I added to this vehicle over here, and it's actually the first time that I've added this weathering to my VVSS Shermans, and it's something that I've been omitting for the longest time, but it's definitely something I'm going to start incorporating on my next generation of Sherman builds of all scales. And that would be the wear that we have here on the outer rim. So, on Sherman tank wheels, like this guy over here, of course, the wheel sits in the middle of the track, and we have the guide horns or the teeth on either side. And because of the location, whenever the vehicle's driven, the teeth will rub against these portions here of the wheel, and it will wear out the paint, leaving for a scratched surface that you see. This is something that would be present on all VVSS Shermans, and yes, I will go ahead and say it, all of my smaller scale VVS Shermans are wrong. The only ones that actually did it correctly are my Tegan examples and also my Armortex. Why is this the case? Well, quite simply put, those wheels are made out of metal on those examples, and since they are radio controlled, the wear happens in these sections literally naturally. So this is something definitely to keep in mind. Adding the wear is going to be a little bit of a problem, or not problem, but it's going to be a little bit extra work to do on the smaller scale builds. However, with these ones over here, you can see what it looks like with the weathering added. It definitely improves the look tenfold, and it definitely makes the model look that much more appropriate. As for the weathering, this was done via the dry brushing method, same technique that I used to weather my MGs and other armaments, and it was just applied again just to the surfaces on the edges. The weathering itself was done before the rubber tire gets fitted in place. Obviously, it's much more easily done at that point, as opposed to trying to work around a real rubber tire. Once the weathering work was completed, the rubber tire was simply just slipped over and glued in place. Or I should say, a bead of glue was added to the rim, and then the tire was just slipped on to the appropriate location. Also, you can see what it looks like with the two little red Zerk fittings fitted in place. And there's nothing much more needs to be done to these wheels here. They are literally ready for installation onto the model. Only when you are installing them, one thing you do want to keep in mind is make sure that you have the rubber tire appropriately positioned where you have that cool little identification info pointing towards the viewer. It's kind of pointless to have all these nice details, and they're found on the inner portion of the suspension. So that's definitely something I'm going to have to pay attention to when it comes time for the actual installation. However, at least at this time, you get a good preview on how the remainder of the paint and weathering work is going to look like on this model. And if the remainder of the tank can come out as good as these wheels, safe to say I'm going to have a nice build on my hands. Fast forwarding further brings us to the point here on the idlers where they're done. The idlers are fully painted, weathered, the Zerk fittings have been fitted in place, and the things are actually ready for installation onto the vehicle. This, of course, I have to pump my brakes on, is going to be happening a little bit later, but for the purpose of this video over here, the idlers are all set. So let me go ahead and pick them up. The paint should be dry by now. Yep, it appears that it is. Okay, so here you can see the rear idler wheel. Currently, the hubcaps are just placed on at this time. These obviously don't or can't be fitted at this point of the build because this little recess here is required in order to permanently mount these things to the idler mount, but that's going to be a topic for a future video. But either way, when the piece is fully mounted in place, this bad boy over here just gets popped onto this location, thus completing the external look. Also, you'll see that this guy just has the primer on at this time. This, of course, is going to be painted and weathered off the model at a later date. But now that the piece is in primer, though, hopefully you can see the identification numbers popping out now on screen. This was quite a bit difficult to do before when everything was left in the raw. But now it looks like you get a good idea on the detailing that's present on the piece. So that's all there is with the hub, and this brings us to the remainder of the idler itself. So the idler is painted and weathered in the exact same format as the row wheels that were previously mentioned. The only difference is, again, because of the material of the outer rim, it's made to look like it's worn steel. And again, this is something I always have to mention in these videos because people always seem to screw this up. On VVSS Shermans, the rear idler wheel was never rubber rimmed, ever. Never rubber rimmed, neither was the return roller for that matter. These things were always steel. HVSS, different ballgame. But on the VVSS Sherman specifically, no, they were always steel. And these pieces here always wear down extremely quickly. The tank just drives about half a mile or so, and within no time, the edges on the rim itself and the face are polished to almost a shiny mirror image. This, again, has to go back to the design of the Sherman tracks with the teeth on the sides. This thing literally hugs the teeth, and the teeth are always rubbing against these sections over here, again, causing the wear. And as for the face, if the tank does have rubber tracks, it'll just basically just polish this thing down to a mirror image. Even if the tracks are metal, it's still going to polish this thing down. So either way, this is how you want to replicate your Sherman rear idler wheels, be it in any scale from 1/72 all the way up to 1/6. As for the paintwork, this is just Ace Hardware Store brand silver spray paint. I go ahead, spray it onto some cardboard over here, and I use my fan brush, and I just dry brush it into these locations. And the dry brushing is also done on the main portions, just within, it's going to take a few coats to build up the opacity, but once the opacity is built up to the way I like it, the piece is then good to go. Also, at this time, because the face has been painted, you get a good idea on the weld bead detailing that I was referencing before. And as you can see, it is a really good, if not identical, dead ringer to the appearance on the real Sherman sprockets that I was using for reference. Also, at this time, you can see, or not see, the seam that runs along the middle section over here because the bodywork was done. With the bodywork and the layers of paint that were built up on the surface, it gives the illusion that the piece is a solid piece, as opposed to being a two-half assembly. Back to the face section. So the Zerk fittings were fitted in place. Of course, these were painted red off the runner, as I showed before. And when it came time for installation, they just drop into the two locations, completing the look. Also, going back to what I said before about the design of these idlers, now that the unit is fully painted, hopefully you get to see that ridge that I was referencing before, that overhang lip. That again is a hallmark on this set compared to the older sets that were made in the past, or all the other Sherman models that are on the market for that matter. And unlike those other Sherman kits, this one actually has the stamping for the plate, for the bottom face section that you can see right here. And you can tell by that little lip right there running on the inside. So as you can see, with the completion of these components over here, this is a huge step forward with the project, and the build can now move to the next step. The last bit of detailing that needs to be fabricated for the running gear is the sprockets. Currently, I'm actually in progress working on that, and once I have the CAD files done, of course, I'll send them off to the printer, and then once they come in hand, I can go ahead and get those pieces assembled, and then painted and weathered to the same condition like you see here. And with the row wheels fully painted and weathered, the next logical step, of course, is to mount them to the model. However, that's not going to be done just yet because the remainder lower section of the model need to go ahead and mirror the wheels in terms of the weathering that needs to be applied. And that cannot be done just yet because I need to add some bits of detailing to the lower portions of the hull in order to get everything ready for painting as well as ready for weathering. Some of these fittings would include the lower rear section deflector grille, the rear and front tinwork mounts, the front mud flaps, as well as the side skirt mounts. All of these are in progress, and once these are fitted to the model, then I could go ahead and thoroughly paint and weather everything, and then once that's done, the wheels can get added at that time. Why this is important is, again, with the opportunity that I have with the model's hull in this position, I have full access to get to weather and paint the lower extremities, as well as also the inner and rear extremities here of each of the VVSS housings. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in here, and trying to get access to this with nicely painted wheels in place is less than ideal. So, the lower hull is going to be able to be painted at this point, or once the pieces are fitted, of course, and then from there, the wheels can be mounted. Another question people might be asking, well, John, just flip them all over and continue and just mount the wheels on at the very end. And you could just weather everything at the very end. Again, not exactly ideal. For a 135, yeah, absolutely. For a 116, true, to a lesser extent. However, for a 1/6 scale tank like this, not exactly the best. Point being, well, very simple. Once the model gets flipped over, the outer extremities on the upper hull start getting detailed out. And when that happens, the model's fragility just skyrockets. So it's best to just get everything done at this time here because the opportunity is the best for that. Once all this is all set and the wheels and the thing is all weathered, the appropriate components are fitted in place, the wheels get remounted, and then finally at that point there, the entire thing can be flipped over and it can spend the rest of its days right side up. But that is something that's going to be mentioned in the next update video. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. See you there.